now.
Oh, there you go.
There it is.
Have you ever used Riverside?
Yeah, I used it a couple years ago.
Yeah, I did it for some journalism project a little while ago and it worked out pretty good.
I liked it, but I started having technical issues with it.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was causing some headaches. And I know Zoom doesn't record locally, but the quality of the audio I was getting was good enough. So, and Zoom,
You're
we my
you're
what?
the
What's that?
you're the wise man of podcasting at this point. Honestly, I was trying to think of a podcast that's somebody who's been doing it for longer than you. You're really the old guard of podcasting right now.
Dude, yeah, I've been through it all. I often wonder if I'm the oldest podcaster. Not only duration, but age.
Yeah.
Like I'm 63. Like, are there, old, like, is there grandpa's podcast?
I was just listening to the Scott Galloway podcast, and he specifically said that he was 60. So yeah, I think
I
you
got him
might
beat.
be you edged him out.
Yeah, but I really like Scott Galloway. I've been listening to his podcast recently. I just listened to one. I think it's called the Raging Liberals or something like
Yeah,
that.
Raging Moderates. Yeah,
Raging Moderates, right? With Tim Miller. He did a conversation that I really enjoyed, and
they're
I like his. I mean, our backgrounds are different in the sense that he's very into business and, like he's had all these companies and he's into money and all that. But I appreciate his self awareness and his concern for younger people. He doesn't have this kind of like, I got mine, fuck y'all attitude. He's got a very, and he said, did you listen to the one with Tim Miller?
I don't know if it was the one with Tim Miller. I've been listening to him pretty consistently. What were they
Well,
discussing?
Tim Miller is a former Republican political strategist who came out as gay, and he's one of the first, like, Republican pros who came out openly. And when Trump came to power, he left the Republican Party, and he's been, agitating against him. And he's on MSNBC a lot, and he's a pretty prominent voice in that community. um but anyway, it was, I really enjoyed it. And at the end, um he said something, Scott Galloway was saying, like, one of the things about getting older is I've kind of lost a lot of my competitiveness, and I feel like I'm emotionally liberated to take a lot of pleasure in the success of younger men. I don't feel
Mm.
threatened by it. And it was just a really sweet thing. And he was talking about how much he admired Tim for coming out and, doing what he believed, even though he didn't know what the road forward would be. And he was clearly screwing his career as a Republican strategist by being anti-Trump and openly gay. Um,
Yeah,
Anyway, yeah, I
I
li- I
think
like him. I like both those guys.
I think part of the like that we can sort of see this like there's a little like enzyme catalyst happening right now of people attempting to find moderation without being politically homeless in the States. I mean, for me it's always really weird because I've spent the majority of the last 10 years living overseas. So I feel like Rip Van Winkle every single time I get back to the US. And people care about vastly different things in the United States than they do in Albania or Somalia or wherever I've been living. And it's like, oh, okay, like, well, what's the thing that we're absolutely enraged about right now that we weren't absolutely enraged about, 6 months when I was back, for Thanksgiving. And I think just because I had previously just been getting like snapshots of it, it seemed schizophrenic. But now that I've been living in the States now for like 8 months, and I'm like, oh yeah, I get it. Like there's a new thing that just sort of pops up for us all to fight internally about every 3 weeks or so whenever the news cycles.
So let's unpack that. Do you think that's a result of the sort of flood the zone strategy of the Trump administration, distract constant distraction from the giant grift that they're running, or do you think it's the nature of the American attention span and consciousness that we're a nation of teenagers who need to be constantly getting dopamine hits, or is it a result of the Reagan administration and trickle down economics and the class warfare that's been going on since the 80s, while the Republicans point at anyone who calls attention to it and calls them class warriors? Why is it that things are calmer in Greece than they are here?
I actually think that part of it, and I'll back up into this, but I think that part of it is actually due to a functioning and healthy democracy. I know that sounds crazy right now, but you rail against things that you actually believe that you have an ability to change. And I think I have seen in countries where the individual doesn't have much of a political voice, or their political actions are generally meaningless. I think they're just sort of resigned to, whoever their dictator de jour is driving the bus. And it's like, well, how do I make my life as pleasant as it can be, while realizing that I'm sort of powerless to change the structures that I'm trapped within. And so I think it on one part, that's the functioning of a really like, robust information space, where people do feel as if they have some agency. But I mean, I specifically came back to the States to study the information space and to study the information space as a domain of war fighting. And I think part of that, like, yeah, there's the flood the zone mentality that Steve Bannon sort of so eloquently coined. But there's also, there's foreign incursions into our information space, and there's also just, I guess, financial incentives from very powerful platforms that operate in a way where we suddenly have a lot of reason to say and engage with the most bombastic thing possible, and oftentimes that's not the best thing for actually discerning the truth. It is a good way for making a lot of noise, though.
Yeah, it's how old are you, Eric?
I'm 37.
37. That's spring chicken. Um, yeah, because the reason I ask is I often think about, and this is something Scott Galloway and I could talk about over our chamomile tea at some point. But like I often think about how much consciousness has changed with the advent of the internet and community and what you're calling the information space. Like like when someone 30 years ago, when someone was an attention whore, what did they do? They joined like the local theater or something, or they go downtown and get up on a soapbox and scream about the end of the world. Like the presence of that appetite, I'm sure the appetite was always there, but it wasn't
The
it,
bar for entry into the information space has never been so low.
right. And so you
Yeah.
get this, because the bar is low, different people show up, right? It's like a very different dinner party if the doors are open and there's a sign saying free food, as opposed to certain people are invited and they're bouncers and all that. And it
Yeah.
just feels like the party has changed. And I wasn't in the party 30 years ago. And maybe I wouldn't be in the party now if the bar hadn't come down to allow people like me to get in, through Joe Rogan or Dan Savage or whatever my entree was. But yeah, I think about how, the whole chicken egg thing, right? Like because the party changes, different people come, then the party changes more, which attracts different people and not only attracts them, but creates them.
Yeah, it's a sort of this is something that I've been calling the Ouroboros of nonsense,
Yeah,
where it's like you have these sort of large personalities that people are magnetized to. You can't keep your eyes off of them either because you agree with them so vehemently or you disagree with them so vehemently. Attention is attention no matter what, and it brings them a great deal of power and cachet. The attention economy as it is works. Back in before the internet. There's only so much reach that you could actually have. And also, there were credentialing institutions
right,
and there were, gatekeepers of fact and fiction. Your opinion had a lot more impact if you were a writer on the front page of the New York Times. And the reason that that institution existed was it was a series of filtration mechanisms that basically got us to the point of that's not nonsense. Now everything looks, can be as polished as the New York Times, but could very well be nonsense. And so I think that people have, um, I mean, I know that I feel this way even as like a now I'm a researcher in national security, the information space, and I think of how I ideally think of myself as like an ingester of information, and this is not how I ingest information at all. What I think I do, ideally, is I think I read something on the right, and I think, well, I need to temper that opinion with something on the left and then I read something somewhere in the center, and then in that Venn diagram, I come to whatever the truth actually is. That's not how I like ingest information at all. I think people think they do that, but what really happens is, I have been algorithmically steered to have certain messages in my space, and I, sort of sort through them to until I find something that makes my beliefs feel most comfortable. Sometimes they call this conclusion hunting, where it's
right.
like I already know exactly what I want to believe. Now let's find the best source that believes the same thing as me.
It's interesting how that um, is a reflection of an internal psychological process that happens in the brain, the human brain, and has happened since time immemorial, which is that the feeling precedes the conscious sort of logical progression that we think has led to that feeling. So
Hmm.
there's lots of psychological research that shows, for example, that someone will meet someone for the first time or see them online or whatever, and they say, yeah, I don't like that person. They immediately don't like that person. They don't know why they don't like them, right? It could be because there's something in their facial structure that reminds them of their uncle who was an asshole, right? But they wait for them to say something and they're, oh yeah, see, I knew it. That's why I don't like him, because he's like that, and or he said this thing or whatever. The feeling precedes the explanation for the feeling.
Yeah, and then you just sort of backfill
Exactly.
your reasoning for that. And then, this is where conclusion hunting is certainly the most dangerous, where suddenly you're led around by whatever conclusions you've reached in the digital space, and then you bring them into the real world. And those worlds are moving ever closer now. There's the line between digital and the real world is really, really thin at the moment. And
Wait,
um,
unpack that. What do you mean by that? Because I would have said they're spinning further away from each other.
oh yeah, okay. So this is exactly kind of what my current work is looking at. And right now I'm a graduate student at the Rand School of Public Policy, which is connected to the Rand Corporation, which is a federally funded research and development.
Which is a very dark, nefarious, deep state running the world behind the scenes kind of place. Am I right?
People, it certainly has that about it, like
I'm not. I'm not. I'm joking. You don't need to
I
respond to
know.
that.
But honestly, it was really funny too because, like, I apply for random stuff all the time, and I was sitting in Albania, and I got an email saying, "Oh, do you want to apply for this?" this program in national security, and it was in Santa Monica, and it was, close to my where my folks live, and I was like, okay, I could use an excuse to go back home. And I knew bits and pieces about Rand, but I was also like, oh, like I literally only hear about this in conspiracy theory documentaries.
Right.
So I know nothing else. And then I looked up the Google review of, because I was like finding out where exactly in Santa Monica it was. And there was like a Google review that was like, these deep state shadow government, da, 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 da. And then it was like 3.5 stars, like of reviewing the building. And I was like, okay, I mean, look, I'm a writer and a researcher. I'll research the hell out of this. And there's some really fantastic books. And I think one of the reasons that so like Alex Abea's Soldiers of Reason is a great book on the history of the Rand Corporation. But really what it is it's a national security and governmental think tank where they just do really long range research, and that could be on a lot of different things. Like some of the original stuff for nuclear warfare and wargaming game theory was created there.
Didn't Daniel Ellsberg work for Rand?
Did and if you are out in Santa Monica at some point, I will take you to the bar that he leaked the Pentagon paper, or yeah, the Pentagon Papers.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
I've
so
I've met him actually. I
no
was at
way.
a birthday party with him. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a champion. I mean, and yeah, I mean, that was the biggest leak since Snowden was the Pentagon Papers, and to give a bit of background on that, basically there was a story. So Daniel Ellsberg was a researcher who was working on a study of the Vietnam War that was in situation. So he was consistently researching it as it was going along, and there are certain times that you're working as a researcher, that it is possible for you to basically do research that is open source, meaning there's no security clearance that's necessary to compartmentalize the information. But you can basically research it so hard that it becomes top secret. At the point that that it can become damaging to, whatever assets in the field, or whatever people
Or the
determine.
story the government's putting out about what's happening.
Exactly, and that was specifically the problem with the Pentagon Papers. So it was a study that was essentially saying, hey, we're actually not doing as well in Vietnam as we say that we are. And this needs to be addressed. And usually when working on these papers, what you'll do is you'll, do this enormous raft of research, and then you'll have policy proposals at the very end of it. And so there were proposals for how the war could have been played differently, and it's a really clear-eyed view of what was going on the ground. Um, Ellsberg, I think, was frustrated that nobody was doing anything about this, and also he had contributed research to something that was then classified beyond his classification status. And so I think that he spent something like, a month just like photocopying pages, and then eventually leaked them to I want to say it was the New York Times. I think it was the New York Times.
I
But he
feel
did
like,
it
yeah,
out.
I feel like it was the Times and the Post, but like one of them didn't want to publish because they were afraid of the legal implications. I
Yeah.
forget which one it was. Maybe the Post didn't, and then he went to the Times. I don't remember. But yeah, I mean, major. Anyway, that was a detour. You were talking about
Yeah.
working at
So
Rand.
so that's what ran. I mean, my and
Or
I've
you
had
don't work at Rand. You work,
no,
you
I
study for an
I stay.
institution that's associated with Rand. Yeah.
Yeah, we're in the same building, but we have our own little like set of cubicles. Um my cubicle's fun. I have a little whiteboard, and I don't really have much in the terms of research to write on it because there's a lot of mathematicians working on equations and stuff. So I just wrote Rand stands for razzle and dazzle. And so now they know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
what are you doing? What's your first master's, was it Oxford or Cambridge or
Oxford, yeah.
Oxford? And what that was in what?
I was in
International?
writing.
Oh, it was in
Yeah.
writing. Okay. All
So I
right.
specialized
Right,
in
we should probably alert people. I mean, I'll try to remember to mention this in the intro, but you've been on the podcast before. We met in Greece. You were
that's right. Yeah. I was gonna
in the
say Spain.
UK. Yeah,
Yeah,
you came to Athens, I think.
yeah. So mostly I've lived I was mostly living in Albania when we met.
All right.
But yeah, during my time in Oxford, I mean I didn't spend actually much time at Oxford altogether. I was it was a part-time program, so I'd just sort of jump in every couple months and turn in some papers and drink some tea and then leave. But I was mostly doing field research because I was writing a book, travel and geopolitical book about unrecognized nations. So I
Mhm.
spent, a year and a half living in Iraqi Kurdistan during their referendum on independence from Baghdad, and then I was in Kosovo, a place called Transnistria,
Right.
and
Yeah, I remember
Liberland.
you. I don't remember if it was from your book or from our conversations, but I remember these crazy stories about you cruising around in Somaliland, like
Yeah, I was in
furniture
Somalia.
shopping or something. And
That's right.
right. And then
I,
you
I
were some other thing, you're like on the back of a jet ski with some dude
right.
who's like the king of an island nation in the Danube or something.
It was it was a wild year, and I'm still in contact with the Liberland people. So
Leave.
I met the president of Liberland on the back of a jet ski, and just through no fault of my own and no conniving on my own, I was asked to be their ambassador to the
Oh,
autonomous
that's right.
Somaliland.
I forgot that those two stories had a logical connection. Yeah.
Barely. It's just hanging on by a thread because there's no reason that anybody should go to Somalia as the ambassador to a Bitcoin-based micronation. But look, you get on the right jet ski at some point.
Hey, yeah. God help you if you get on the wrong jet ski.
On it. Well, I mean, doing that research is what got me because I ended up banned from Turkey and I'm still banned from Turkey, it seems. I was
Mm.
flying through Athens or not I was flying to Athens recently. And I had to fly through Istanbul and I got picked up again and brought to a back room and held for like 3 hours while which was really I don't know, maybe you can tell me if this is a if this is a good thing as an author or a bad thing as an author. But at a certain point, because I wrote about Kurdistan in my book, two Turkish officers came out and they had my Amazon, like my book up on Amazon, and they're like, "What is this book? What's this book about?" And the title is, "You Are Not Here" travels through countries that don't exist. And I was like, yeah, it's about countries that don't exist. And he's like, what's Kurdistan? What were you doing in Kurdistan? I was like, look at the title.
It
It's
doesn't exist.
because it doesn't exist. And then he was like, yeah, but like, I don't know, what were you doing in Kurdistan? So is it like, am I digging in the right direction if I'm getting interrogated about my book, or should I be?
I don't know. I've only been interrogated about my books by, jealous spouses. It doesn't so far. I haven't had any anal probes in airports.
I was gonna say, yeah, I think we're in vastly different parts of the bookstore.
Yeah.
I can't imagine I'd like yours anymore though, because I don't know if I could field that many questions about how to properly manage your polycules, Google schedule.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely not my expertise. People are always disappointed, like I'm supposed to be the king of polyamory or something, and when I tell them like actually I don't do that, they're like, what are you talking about? Like, no, no.
I mean, look, there is a king of polyamory out there at some point, and maybe you can get his email and forward on the questions to the king of polyamory.
Yeah, yeah, I don't
I'd
know.
imagine it's a board, like it's a council of
It should
polyamory.
be. It
That
should
would make
be.
more sense, right?
Yeah, there shouldn't be a king. There should be a panel and they should have endless meetings.
So I
Yeah.
was, and I'm trying to do. I'm probably going to work on a new book at some point here. I'm just sort of like stuck in between ideas, but
So why
I
why are you doing this masters aside from hanging out and visiting your parents?
Yeah,
What's the larger strategic importance, or you just want to be super masterful?
I just want to keep collecting black belts in nerd shit. Um, so I realize that a lot of the decisions that have been made by the United States and in places that I've lived in or worked in, they're things that I consistently find myself scratching my head about, or being, somewhat culturally disgraced by. Like, I lived in northern Iraq, and I've seen, the quote unquote like freedom barriers that were meant to stop car bombs that were created for, the invasion of Iraq, and the quote unquote restabilization of Iraq. And so I've seen the output of a lot of American policy. I've lived around it. I know people who have had their lives changed by decisions that were made somewhere in Washington. And I don't know, I'm constantly wondering like how I can kind of be the most useful as a writer given a very, very specific set of skills and interests, which is like, I'm pretty decent at being really culturally uncomfortable and traveling to far-flung places and not only surviving but getting some hopefully entertaining writing out of it. And I realized that the best thing that happens really if I keep sort of writing about geopolitics from the ground, which I think is really important, without ever understanding it from a policy level, is, the best possible thing that happens for me is I have people on the coast who already agree with me and probably look like me, nodding their heads and saying, great book, but probably also haven't read that book. And nothing actually changes. The needle doesn't actually get moved. Um, or I could go to a place where decisions actually are getting made and people actually who think about these things deeply, I've come to find, are crafting the next decision that the United States will take. And honestly, I've been like in one respect, I've been somewhat disappointed because it never seems too terribly dark and nefarious. Um, but also it's been really enlightening in a lot of other ways. The people who are the closest to making decisions that could invoke violence in the rest of the world, I think at least the teachers that I've had uh deal with this very delicately. I think first day of national security class, our professor stood up there and he was like, it is kind of disgraceful that we have to study this, right? Like we should all feel somewhat disgraced that we have to study this because human beings should have figured out a better way to solve our problems. But we haven't yet. So that means that we have to figure out a way to do it the best way possible. And so I think that one of the things I've been really interested in and I've been really, stoked about is how much they're consistently, making sure that we remember that there are human beings on the other end of this. That national security ideally is not about making a foreigner's life much worse for a punctuated period of time, but it's about extending the health and wealth and livelihood of people that are within our borders. And it also just shows you like how hair-pullingly difficult it is to make good ideas actually get enacted in a democratic system. At a certain point, there's political willpower behind certain ideas, and there's political willpower to stop certain ideas. And yeah, I guess my long-term sort of strategic vision is just like I want to have I want to be able to speak knowledgeably about this stuff and not just be a guy that has showed up in Iraq and looked at a couple of craters and said war is bad. I think there's plenty of authors that can do that exact thing. And I'm particularly concerned with how our information space operates right now. We're sort of in this moment of truth decay throughout the world, and it's not just in the United States, it's everywhere. And trying to propose some solutions that are potentially enactable.
So you see yourself primarily as a writer and you're educating yourself in the inner workings of government and foreign policy and all that, or are you aiming to get to infiltrate the government with some sort of outsider's common sense?
Oh man. Well, so I think that so the answer is I'm an author, and a writer, and I have this hypothesis that hopefully will work out in a couple of years. I think that one of the best ways to open what's called a policy window, and a policy window is the point at which political will meets public attention meets the an elected official taking that cause on, right? And they're very small and they don't open for a long period of time. I think one of the best ways to actually open up a policy window is to engage with popular nonfiction audience readers. I mean, we've seen this in the sort of social sphere quite a bit. I can't remember if you interviewed him, but there was that one guy who wrote that book about sleep, and suddenly he was everywhere talking about how important it was that,
Right.
everybody got 8 hours of sleep. And that dude looked like the most well-rested dude in the entire world. Um,
Yeah, I know who you're
just
talking about. Yeah, I
yeah,
forget
that
his
guy.
name.
But I think
Yeah.
he did like wrote a remarkable book that was able to get people to actually start looking at policies and start changing them. Muhammad Yunus, who wrote Banker for the Poor, and sort of created this idea of microloans. Like this was
Mm,
I mean, it was a huge thing in the international development world when I was working in international development. And I mean, this is just like a New York Times book that was around. I've seen how policy can kind of like work its way through the
yeah.
system in the United
Jonathan
States.
Haidt right now with his thing about phones and they're banning
Perfect,
phones in
perfect.
schools.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Incredible, incredible book, incredible author. I think that these are the voices that are able to actually direct public conversations between the people who are on the inside and the people who are on the outside. And I think one of the things that I'm trying to preserve as much as possible is being able to speak from the authority of having been on the ground in a lot of places and having the desire to still go out into the field, but
right.
also knowing a bit more how the system works. I also
Yeah.
hate Washington. Washington sucks.
That's interesting. I'm glad you said that because I was afraid you were thinking of giving up the writing in order to like get into the government. But I think you're such a good writer and you have such a lively, entertaining voice, and you also have this sort of intrepid curiosity about plopping yourself down in the middle of, definitely diarrhea land. Which and that's rare. I mean, it's
They
kind of
call it.
but I also think like you're probably going to have, given the sort of changing media landscape. I mean, I think books are great, but you're going to have some kind of, audio visual, like, you might, because I'm thinking about like Vice. When Vice first came out, there was some fucking awesome foreign correspondence, you know, and now Vice is gone. I don't know what the fuck happened to Vice, but it collapsed under somebody's ego or something. And I don't see those people anymore. I don't see that perspective, that kind of gritty on the street, talking to real people, not corporate filtered, not 60 minutes, um, it's weird. I miss that.
I actually work with a producer from Vice. He was there sort of at the implosion. He was there for I think 4 or 5 years. So we met and we actually met online because we were part of a war correspondence network called the Vulture Club on Facebook. And started talking at some point while I was in Somalia. we both mutually thought each other had contacts that we didn't actually have, but ended up talking. I had thought I thought I had some contacts in Syria that he needed, and then after talking for like 20 minutes, we realized we didn't. But then we ended up talking for about 3 hours about kind of some of my work and what he was up to. But we eventually met each other in Albania, years and years ago now, and started working together on some documentary series. So, and I agree. I think that there needs to be more on the ground, real stories told. And one of the things that we're kind of working on is we're trying to, and this is definitely one of the more batshit ideas. So, where since my last book was really about trying to find out what a country is by living in all these countries that don't exist. Now we're thinking about actually doing kind of what that libertarian, microstate that I went to did back in the day, which is start our own country, which is something that is oddly doable in our current reality. And I mean, this is not, this is not a play to have political power because that is certainly not something I want. But what it is it's an idea of like showing how the magic trick is done
Hmm.
because I think once you see somebody make a coin disappear and then reappear and it's jaw dropping and amazing and then you know, they show you how it's done, and maybe you can't recreate it, but you at least can see how the illusion made you think in a certain way. And, the thing that I'm noticing is the more dangerous illusion of our time is this sort of rabid, blind patriotism, which is definitely on the rise. And I think that there is a middle line to have of feeling fondly about your country, uh, while not being completely deluded about everything it does being perfect and right. I think that that's actually not love, that's obsession. If you love, your uncle and they're getting hammered and doing donuts in a Kmart parking lot every night, like you're not going to be like, that's a great idea. You should keep doing that. You'll probably say something about it. And I think that, true patriotism really comes from loving what you think that your country can be, and that's better and more magnanimous for everybody in its borders and hopefully around the world too, since we're a very powerful nation.
Are
Um,
countries real?
so good question, and I should be uniquely situated to answer this. Um, depending on okay, so the let's talk about nation states. So nation states are an invention of the 1600s, basically. So the modern nation state as we know it was created in the 1640s, and it came from a treaty called the Treaty of Westphalia. Basically, the 30 Years' War had just happened, and the 30 Years' War had come on the tail end of the 100 Years' War. And so, why was Europe just killing itself for like 150 years? Because the 100 Years' War was, it had some pauses, and they just call it the 100 Years' War because it sounds better. Um, but really, the reason that Europe kept, murdering all of Europe for so many years was because power was sort of laced through the continent. It wasn't in large chunks that could negotiate with one another. You had, somebody with a cousin who was a duke in Prussia that was also, connected with a family in Bavaria that was also connected with a family in Russia. And suddenly, if one went to war, they all went to war. And there was no real stopping it until the landowners and the lords and probably ladies just said, hey, we're gonna do a treaty and we're gonna stop doing this. So this kept happening. And part of Why this kept happening was the fact that there was a massive change in how information was disseminated. And that was the printing press, right? The printing press made it so that we could democratize the spread of information. And specifically, what happens when you democratize the spread of information through technology is you switch out the old guards for new guards. Previously, the old guard was the Catholic Church. You know, you can only listen to the Bible as interpreted by the Catholic Church. Protestant Reformation comes up. Martin Luther dons his weird looking hat and nails a bunch of writs to the door at Wittenberg. And suddenly Protestantism is a thing. The big schism happens, and he's saying, wait, we actually don't need you to transmit the word of God to us. We can read it for ourselves. And the Catholics say, no, 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 and let's all kill each other for many, many years. Anyway, most of European history is just everybody killing each other for hundreds of years. And I don't think they should look down on us because they did the same thing. Um, Hot take. Uh, we get up to the 1600s. And the 30 Years' War has just ended. A very confusing conflict between Catholics and Protestants that was started when three dudes were thrown out a window in Prague. You would think, oh, yeah, that is an act of war. But the guys were fine. Like, they didn't even die. They just got thrown out a window.
It was a
It's
first
called the
floor window.
I don't know. I need to go because it's been a long time since I've been to Prague. But I really want to see it now. So it's called the Defenestration of Prague. Yeah, depending on who you ask, they fell into shit or they didn't. And
But it
this
saved
is
their lives, whatever.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, everybody kills each other for a long time, and they reach the Westphalian Peace, the Treaty of Westphalia. And basically, what they say is, hey, what if our sovereignty didn't depend upon a sovereign, a person, who is your sort of benefactor, and they have their own relationships that they can, amass armies and start murdering each other if they want to. But what if sovereignty had something to do with the land that you're born into? And the
Hmm.
land that you're born into would have these borders drawn across them. And the borders, those are the things that you're now going to be beholden to. And what can happen this way, and it's going to help prevent war, is the people who are the sovereigns of the borders, they can negotiate with each other. But the thing we have to remember is all of those states are equal. Like there's an equality amongst states, and therefore they can negotiate with one another. So when I think of the nation state, it's really an ideological technology that was made to prevent and contain the outbreak of war. And you
Right. And
might
the assets were contained because the assets were physical, right? You had your harvest, you had your soldiers, you had your gold, you had whatever. But
That's exactly right. Yeah.
right. So that
And
made sense. But are we at a point where that no longer makes sense because assets are fluid? Assets are largely non physical, right? They're numbers and computer screens fluctuating, currency rates going up and down, the price of gold going up, oil, all this kind of stuff. And also, I mean, the reason I asked the question is to me, nation states at this point in history seem like professional sports teams, where for the hoi polloi, it gives them a sense of meaning and belonging and community that can be manipulated to the advantage of the owners and the players and the economic structure that exists above it. And the economic structure that exists above it does not give a shit if Real Madrid wins or Barcelona wins this year. All they give a shit about is that people keep paying money to watch the games.
yeah,
So
so
I don't
you're
think
exactly right.
I don't think Elon Musk is American. I don't think these billionaires are aligned. I don't think corporations, people talk about Apple being an American corporation. I don't think that makes any sense,
Mm.
you
Yeah, I
know?
think you're exactly right, and you're digging in exactly the territory that I'm researching right now, which is
Mm.
I mean, so my scholarly research is all about information space defense and fifth generation warfare, and then the film stuff that I'm working on is about making a country. They are weirdly connecting because it has everything to do with, creating something that's within this most important space in the world, which is the space between your ears. And so the assets thing is the exact right way to think about it. It's like the borders that previously underpinned nation states were really all about pooling a certain amount of wealth, prestige, and the ability to do violent force. And so now those genies have left the bottle of borders, right? We
Yeah.
can hire somebody in, I don't know, Malaysia to create manufacture textiles. We can reap the benefits of, I don't know, some trade deal that's happening in the Netherlands by investing in a company from Oakland, California. The jig is sort of up because the pool of wealth and influence and power, it has now dribbled away from nation states. I tend to think of and some people think about are starting to think about it this way in terms of like the creation of a new nation state, or the creation of what's called a network state sometimes, is the idea. And I gotta say, it makes me feel uncomfortable, and I think it's because of just my American culture. But they start to think of nation states as essentially subscription services that you are born into.
Mm.
And you can think of, I don't know, what is the US package that you get? Like the freemium package of the US suffers in comparison to the freemium package of Norway.
Oh yeah.
Like it's awesome if you were born into Norway and you've got a really great freemium package. But what is the platinum gold level package for the United States? That's way better than in Norway, right? Because then they're going to take, a massive amount of your wealth, and there's maybe a more difficult. Actually, I don't know anything about doing business in Norway, but I know we got a lot more billionaires than they do. Um, so the question that a lot of people are asking right now is, won't billionaires, these sometimes they're called sovereign individuals, won't these sovereign individuals eventually start shopping around for statehood as a service where they can just find the best premium package? And this is already happening. I
They
mean,
already
it's
are. That's what I was going to say. Yeah. And I've been doing that as a very much non-billionaire.
right.
There you can, and this is something getting back to the beginning of our conversation. This is something Scott Galloway talks about. Lifestyle arbitrage. Like if you can make your money in the U.S., a U.S. salary, but live in Ecuador, your standard of living is going to be far better. and
Yeah.
and and another factor in this, what you're talking about there with the premium package in Norway here and there, is you can get the freemium package. Go to Amsterdam, marry a Dutch woman, you've got the freemium package in Holland, you've got the free health care and the lack of desperation on the streets because there's a floor to how far they'll let people fall. You get all that, and then you get the best things about American culture, which is the music and the movies and all that stuff, because that stuff doesn't follow any borders. So it's become, it feels to me like there's this sloshing around of things that used to be solid have been liquefied.
Yeah,
and
I think that's a really good way of putting it.
and the people either who are free because of decisions they've made, like you and me, can sort of play that, or they're free because they've just got a shit ton of money and they say, oh, I'm a resident of Honduras, because there's no income tax in Honduras. I have a friend who's quite wealthy, and he always says money goes where it's wanted.
Wait, oh, that's a great phrase.
Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. You know, I've been operating off of this framework of money, attention, power, as far as like, you know, how do you accrue agency in the world as we see it now? And I think that the model that I have here is that if you get two, you get the other one for free, or you can get the other one for free. So, like, if let's say if you have a lot of attention and power, maybe like a politician, right? Ideally, you shouldn't have a lot of money because you're a civil servant. And yet, we find out that people who have a lot of attention and power just somehow do really well in the stock market. And nobody knows why. They're just probably good at guessing. Um, but if you have, let's say, a lot of money and attention, then you can probably get power. This could look like a celebrity who decides to throw their hat into the political ringer.
George
That's
Clooney.
never happened. Yeah,
Yeah.
George, I was just thinking about Clooney. You know, he bought a satellite with his money from Nespresso. I'm pretty sure this is true, but everybody fact check it. I think that he bought a satellite or time from a satellite to try and track Joseph Kony's army in Uganda. This might be complete dog shit, but please look it
It sounds great.
up.
Hey,
But
speaking of celebrities and power and all that, and this is getting back to something you were saying earlier. Have you ever seen, oh, you were talking about the window, right? Like where,
a policy window.
yeah, where things line up and you can actually have impact. Have you ever seen a movie called Charlie Wilson's War?
Incredible film. One of my favorites.
I love that movie.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
go back and watch YouTube clips of that movie like every week or two. I mean, it keeps feeding them to me because I've watched so many. But man, that is such a good movie. I feel like it's so educational for exactly that policy window you're talking about, and how things like charisma and relationships, like his relationship with the rich lady who
Yes.
funds all the stuff, and then the what's his name, Philip Seymour Hoffman character is just
Yeah.
so fucking good in that movie.
Gust, I can't remember. Gust, he's a famous CIA operative.
Gust, yeah, and it's with a T,
Yeah,
but he
uh-huh.
doesn't give a shit that people always say Gus. Yeah.
He's
uh
he's an absolute
oh,
legendary
that's
CIA.
based on a real person. I didn't know
Yeah, oh
that.
yeah,
Oh
very
yeah.
much so.
uh
In fact, one of my one of my professors is she was previously with CIA, working in let's just say a region of interest from the early 2000s. And she was talking about the difficulty of briefing policymakers. And I think from the outside, a lot of what we sort of think of the work of intelligence is sabotage and collecting human intelligence using subversive means and all that. And of course, like that certainly is a big portion of what the intelligence apparatus of the United States does. But another really important part of that is not only just collecting that intelligence, but it's translating it into the ear of the policymaker, right? There's the one of the sort of greatest areas that you can be in terms of the CIA from my understanding. I've never worked with the intelligence agencies.
so
Um,
you say.
so I say, yeah. But it's to be on the president's daily brief, and the president's daily brief is he needs to hear, he or she, in the future, needs to hear all of the most important threats and all the most important decisions that might need to be understood or addressed every single day. And you imagine becoming an analyst and then potentially doing field work and then working your way up so that you can talk to the president for what, like 15 minutes, but to make those 15 minutes the most high impact 15 minutes possible. That it's really about communicating the need for something really an important and urgent way, so that decision makers can make decisions. And one of my professors was just talking about like the difficulty of doing that, that oftentimes people are just sort of too busy in Washington to understand the complexities of the situation, and all they really want to hear is good guy, bad guy, who's good, who's bad. And if you remember in Charlie Wilson's War, he keeps repeating that one phrase, we need to shoot the helicopters down. We need to shoot the helicopters down. And
Right.
that's essentially the job of moving, moving the needle politically. And I think, back to Jonathan Haidt talking about like getting rid of phones in school. Like what's the bottom line up front of the book? It's like, well, the internet is destroying the brains of our young people. It's particularly destructive for young girls. We need to get rid of phones in school, right? That's a point that a policy window can open. But
Mm.
you have to have all of that experience undergirding we need to shoot the helicopters down. We need to get rid of phones in school. It's so hard to do, and it takes a really special communicator to make that happen.
Gust Avrakatos, by the way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's
Yeah.
he's legendary.
So let me ask you this, and this might feel like an unfair question, and I don't mean it to be, but um, to what extent are we talking about ship maintenance on a sinking ship? In other words, expanding that question of the nation state being an outdated, antiquated concept that's really only used for crowd control and resource extraction from the working class at this point. Um, Trump is in many ways a post-national president. Trump is not, I don't think, really interested in American interests, in defending American interests. I think Trump is in that class along with Putin and the Qataris and all the rest of them. It's an international, it's a supranational class. They exist beyond nation states. Their assets are spread all over the world. They're liquid, they're moving around. They've got houses everywhere. They've got yachts, they've got private planes. They exist on a plane where this stuff doesn't matter, like taxation rates and currency fluctuations doesn't matter to them. So here we are talking about bringing the best information to the policymakers and the State Department, but if the government itself is no longer American, in the sense that Apple is not American, it's only nominally American, right? General Electric and fucking Exxon, they're nominally American companies, but they're not really. Hasn't the game changed in a way where this stuff doesn't even fucking matter anymore? Like, what are American interests? What are we defending?
Yeah, I mean, I think my answer to this changes depending on how good of a day I'm having, uh, and that's
Yeah,
often the, especially, I put out an intelligence brief every
which
week,
I
and
really enjoy. And I want to talk
oh,
about the last one, before we run out of time, about nukes and
nukes.
all that. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so are we polishing the furniture on the Titanic? If nation statehood potentially might be going the way of the dodo. Um, One, I think that your assertion about Trump being a transnationalist and a part of this sort of global oligarchic class, I think that's hitting pretty close to the mark. Somebody was asking me I think another analyst was asking me the other day, uh, do you think that Trump would ever have like his version of like a Hitler Youth or something like that? I thought about it for a second and I was like, I actually don't think so because I don't think that he cares much about pulling the lever of virulent patriotism unless it is directly enriching him. I think that he's clearly been motivated by accruing more attention, power, and money, but for himself, not for the nation.
Right.
Um, so uh, I think that's one part of it. That yeah, it's very possible that he is like one of our first truly transnational political leaders. As far as the dilution of the nation state in general, I think that is something that will happen at some point in the future. It absolutely will happen at some point in the future. We've all been born into nation states. I mean, actually, there are some people who haven't been born into nation states. There are people who are stateless in the world. But it is so the water that we swim in, and the nation state seems so monolithic that it could never change. But the reality is that political systems always change, and the unit of governance that you exist within is typically based off of, at least this is one theory, and I tend to agree with it. It's based off of how you have to fight wars and generate money. Previously, in sort of first generation warfare, in order to fight wars and generate money, you had to have knights. And the money generation came from the creation of the apparatus to make a knight in the first place. You have to have a certain amount of food, you have to have a certain amount of technical acumen. So you have to have an artisanal class. And this is where we got like kingdoms from. Um, at the point that firearms become a thing, suddenly violence and deadly violence can be democratized pretty well. No matter who you are, if a bullet hits you in the head, you're probably a goner. And as it turns out, it's really easy to learn how to shoot a bullet. So that was part of why some people believe that really democracies became the letter of the land, and right now we have the most democracies on the world that we've ever had.
Because of threat
That's
of assassination.
well, I think that it's obliquely about threat of assassination, but it's more about communal buy-in that you are less likely to ruin a community that you feel that you have buy-in into, where the state has to maintain a monopoly on the use of violence. At least that's what Francis Fukuyama says. But because it is possible to have popular revolutions that we've seen all throughout, I mean, the fall of Yugoslavia, the color revolutions, throughout modern history, the leadership has to really play ball if it wants to stay in power, unless you have like an absolute control on violence and information, like say a North Korea.
Right. So, okay, that leads me into your recent newsletter about nukes, because one of the things, your newsletter seems to be framed very much as like we're losing the handle on keeping nuclear weapons, contained to certain states that already have them, that have demonstrated that mutually assured destruction, they've respected that thus far. But the question I've always had about nukes is, what is the first two questions? One, what is the ethical, moral argument that says that we have the right to nukes, but you don't, to any country? If a country's sovereign, why does Iran not have a right to their own nuclear program? That makes no sense. I don't see any moral argument that can be justified. You've already acknowledged they're a sovereign state. They've got the technology, they've got the scientific know-how, they've got the resources. Who are you to say they can't? It seems like, Kissingerian realpolitik, and nothing else. But then
I think you're right. Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, and I know they're always like, oh, it's the, peace in the world. Fuck that. You guys don't give a shit about peace in the world. You just want to keep the big guns for yourself. But then the other thing is, wouldn't the effect ultimately perhaps be democratizing, for exactly the same reason that you just outlined, in a democracy, that when everybody's got access to violence, the governing class needs to watch their shit, because, you can end the game. A normal player can end the game at any time. So the game better be fair.
Yeah, so I think that what you just hit on, the most important thing you said there is, well, two things. One, Kissingerian realpolitik. I'll touch on that in a second. But you
By
said
the
a
way,
norm.
sorry to interrupt you, but Henry Kissinger's assistant reached out to me at one point to have him on my podcast. Can you imagine that?
I would have been. I mean, honestly, if I would have taken that conversation. I'd be so curious.
No,
It's so wild.
you know what I
He was a
did?
different guy.
I copied and pasted Anthony Bourdain's quote about Kissinger. How if he
Yeah.
ever met him, he'd smack him in the face, and the whole thing
Um,
about the dead Cambodians and all that. I sent
so
that back,
wild.
and
Yeah.
the assistant responded, "Understood." It was great. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you. You were going to respond to that.
Well, so the thing that you mentioned there was any normal player, right? And this is not my belief, but this is a belief that I think is runs rampant through American foreign policy towards the Middle East, which I disagree with greatly. I think that the United States and the West more broadly treats the Middle East with like it grades it on a curve that it itself has generated. I think that partially that's because the some of the greatest moments of violence in the world that Middle Eastern actors, not the Middle East broadly, uh, has have visited upon the West are suicide attacks. And so what that says to policymakers is, well, if you're willing to do a 9/11, you're gonna have suicide attackers. Well, then clearly you are not adhering to the rational actor model, and the rational actor model is essentially just this idea in decision making theory that the everybody will operate in a way that will maximize their own benefits while minimizing any detriment that can come to them or to
Yeah.
their
But that
right.
model's been used in economics for years and proved to be totally nonsense.
There's there's this quote that I have come across from some geopolitics conversations, which is like oh well, chemistry came from alchemy and astronomy came from astrology, so I wonder what comes after economics. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, good
and
question.
yeah. And so I think that from a policy point of view, the reason that American policymakers are saying that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon is because they do not see them as fully rational actors. I tend to believe that anybody in a sufficient amount of power has to demonstrate their rationality to enough basically gatekeepers to power that they're going to maintain their position of power within that system. I
And
mean,
you don't see a blaring exception to this sitting in the White House right now?
there is a theory about this, and the great man theory might hold true. I don't know. I think that the excesses of the current administration are constrained. I think that we're just seeing a rapid amount of them at this moment. In terms of like constraint, right? Um, Doge came in and said, "Hey, we're going to cut $2 trillion from the federal budget." They come in, yes, have they done a lot of things? Totally. Are those things being litigated massively by Congress, which actually has the purse strings? 100%. So the system is constraining the worst excesses, and maybe it's just because I'm optimistic despite looking at terrorists all the time.
But it's
Uh,
also if you believe that Doge existed to do what they said they were there to do and not to download massive amounts of private information about American citizens.
and this is okay, so now I'll be cynical. I think that that's already easily downloaded. I think that personally identifying information is pretty cheap and easy to get on the public internet, and I don't think that the tax information is that difficult to get. So I think that might have been a lot of squeeze for no juice. But then
Hmm.
again, that implies a certain amount of abject brilliance on the part of Elon Musk. And I tend to
Abject brilliance. That's a great phrase.
I just tend to think that
Yeah.
people are more ignorant than malicious, and that has usually been a good way of modeling what behavior will be.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, like the system is getting constrained. or is sort of like, and then also look at the fact that, within the next, what, year, we're going to have another raft of congressional elections, and it's going to be tightened down even more. So all of these policies kind of have to be pushed through, and I think there will likely be a lot of litigation against them. Um, for whatever, for however uncomfortable it is, the current administration is doing a lot of things that are so far out of bounds for the American government that it's actually forcing the government to use its muscles again to constrain this one actor. And I think if things, go well, that's a great thing. We've proven that, like, the system works. We like, Donald Trump was railing against the previous election. Oh, it's rigged. Oh, it's rigged. It's rigged. And then he won, and it's like, oh, guess what? It wasn't rigged. Okay, well, look, the system works, and we have to trust that a system was created that will constrain the worst, uh, uh, the worst desires of eccentric political leaders. And I certainly
But
hope
don't you
that.
see him working really hard to undermine the very immune system that you're celebrating at the moment? Like all the JAGs are fired, any judges who go against him are at risk of being arrested. They're in court, in the Supreme Court, challenging the very notion that federal judges can disrupt executive orders and federal policy, which has
Yep.
been baked into the system forever. Like it seems to me that he's very actively undermining the very things that you are hopeful about.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll be less optimistic when he's successful in undermining those things. What I'm seeing right now is I'm seeing the very slow legislative mechanisms digesting all of these actions at the moment. I'm seeing that in terms of his, like, deportation rate, it's lower than Obama. It's lower than Joe Biden. So he's clearly not doing better at that. I see that even his federal appointees are calling out his actions as unconstitutional. So
Some
that,
of them,
yeah,
not Eileen Cannon.
I don't know who she is.
Oh,
Was
she's the dipshit that he nominated. You put in, a federal judgeship in Florida who had zero court experience. And then she threw out the case against him, the secret documents case of keeping all the shit at his
right?
Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah,
Some of them are going against him, but not all. But
yeah,
do you know who Peter Zion is?
yeah. I love Peter Zion.
Yeah, I listen to him a lot.
He's
And
a he's he and I so I was trained to think geopolitically by a guy named George Friedman, who was the previous editor and chairman at Stratfor, which is where Zion worked. But now
right.
he's got his own thing. I love his work. I think he's fantastic.
He's funny. His videos are hilarious. He's every day he's like in an airport somewhere or
Yeah.
hiking in New Zealand or he's got these funny hats he wears and he's a very charismatic guy.
One of
Um
one of the things that I really like about him too is he talks, he talks like a geopolitical person. Like and one of the things that I'm really attempting to do, and hopefully it's coming across with the newsletter, the Under Report, is uh I really want to sort of give people the tools to not sound their own personal alarm at the turn of everything. Like there's ways of kind of understanding the geopolitical realities and what can happen and what can't happen. And I think, especially being back in the States, I noticed that I'm constantly being smacked in the face by a Fox News alert. And it's alarming. And I remember one of my old bosses telling me that, if you're ever really disgusted or enraged, or you are ever absolutely in love with a politician or a news story or something, then somebody's making money off of you. We should generate a certain amount of equanimity around the events that are happening in the world so that our internal life isn't just blown like a bag in the wind at the change of every political maneuver, because that is exactly how we become numb to the stuff that's really important.
Mm,
So, I basically do what I would have done as an analyst, and I just say, hey, here are five stories that aren't making headlines but are important, and the reason that they're important, and what we're watching for next. This is open source intelligence work. And I think that another thing that I'm trying to do is as best as possible is like some of these complex these concepts are either very complex, or they're very boring, or they're just something you've heard a lot but like really don't have never taken a deep dive into. So like every week I try to take one of these concepts and be like, well, why is it important? Like, why do we care about the Red Sea in the first place? What the fuck is a rare earth mineral? As it turns out, this is so boring, and I will never write this. But there are rare earth minerals, there are rare earth metals, there are rare earths, and it's all just like these random elements. I've done that reading, so nobody has to, because it doesn't matter. Like,
mm,
nobody needs to know that it's the lanthanides that are particularly important because of their electron microstructure. What they
yeah.
need to know is the fact that, like, the US is gonna depend on a certain amount of those minerals, and that means that we're going to end up fighting in different countries for them, either diplomatically or with force. Um, so I mean that's kind of what and the nuclear armaments is the same thing. I agree with you. I think that there is a democratization of force, which forces people to the negotiating table. And nuclear deterrence has been responsible for a good deal of the peace of the post-Cold War years, which is so ass backwards that the most destructive weapon that humanity has ever created is so destructive that we actually can't use it. But the most important place that we have nuclear weapons is in our minds and in our imaginations. We need to keep that idea of, if one goes off, the world is destroyed, so that nobody ever uses them. I think the worst case
Mm.
scenario is potentially using a small yield nuclear device. They have small yield nuclear devices, 1 kiloton, that.
Tactical.
Yes, well, that's the term.
Yeah.
And yeah, they have these devices. Sometimes they call this the socialization of nuclear war, which is so sterile that it sounds arch. But the socialization of nuclear war is like, yeah, we used to just never use those things, but now Pittsburgh is gone. Um, and the world didn't end. That to me is the most dangerous thing, because there is some belief that the whole nuclear winter hypothesis actually is not real, that it wouldn't necessarily completely end the world, but it's so important that we like continue to keep this like never again mentality, because it forces people to the negotiating table.
Wouldn't it be beautifully ironic if a little nuclear winter is what it took to correct global warming?
There's a company in England right now that just got $50 million to do some sort of atmospheric manipulation that sort of mirrors nuclear winter. Essentially, they're cloud seeding to make a certain amount of density in the atmosphere to stop the sun from beating down on us.
Yeah.
Frankly, I don't think that should be done by like a single company, because the weather
Yeah.
is everywhere.
Well,
But
and see, this gets back to what I was saying earlier, where I feel like sometimes I feel like our conversations and our mental constructs lag quite far behind the changes in reality. It's like
yeah,
people are talking now about like, oh, maybe we should limit the introduction of AI because it's going to have all these effects on the economy. And like, are you fucking kidding me? Show me an example where we've limited the introduction of anything that made a bunch of money for people. It's never happened. It never will happen as long as we're functioning in this global capitalist system. So shut the fuck up. Stop trying to distract me with the possibility that we're going to limit the introduction of AI. We didn't limit the introduction of PFAS or whatever those forever
Yeah.
chemicals. And now we find out, oh, everybody's getting cancer and microplastics. Oh, big surprise. Oh, we've, fracking chemicals. It's illegal to, ask the companies what the chemicals are that they're pumping into our aquifer. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, let's talk about what's really happening. And I feel so frustrated because it's like, Frank Zappa said that politics is the entertainment division of the military industrial complex.
Solid.
It's like all this energy being spent talking about what we should do when none of that is even theoretic, not even practically possible. Like we're
Yeah.
okay, satellites. Who owns space? Well, we haven't figured that out yet. Okay, but meanwhile, corporations and governments have been sending shit up there for decades now, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
our minds are so far behind what's happening. And Peter, the reason I mentioned Peter Zion, I respect him a lot. I think he's super smart, really great. But one thing that he keeps talking about is how, when he's talking about the Russia Ukraine situation, he goes back to this thing and he says, well, Russia has always existed as this, very vulnerable populace because of the plains, and so they always expand out from the time of the czars when they can. They expand out to these natural barriers, whether it's the
The
Baltic
Ural Mountain.
Sea, the
Yeah.
Ural Mountains. There's something in Romania or something. And because then if they can control those, there are gaps in those natural barriers. If they can control those gaps, then the tanks can't come through, or the cavalry, or whatever it is. And I'm like, dude, I think tank wars are done. I don't
Mm.
think there's ever going to be another tank war. Why the fuck should we invade Russia with tanks when we can I don't even know who we is in this. um all we need to do is align with the Russian oligarchs to extract the resources and have the wealth go to the people in the inner circle, wherever that inner circle exists. There's no need to invade and occupy. Who gives a shit? You need the rare earth metals. You just talk to the guy who owns the company or the land where the rare earth metals are, and you work out a deal, and there you go. And if he doesn't want to make out a deal, you fucking kill him, or you kidnap his kids, or whatever. It doesn't. I just think it feels to me like war is outdated. Certainly tank war, and relatively soon even infantry war. It'll all just be drones.
Yeah, you're not wrong. There's and a lot of the military industrial complex would certainly agree with you. I think the Marines are now moving away from having any sort of tanks in their divisions, and they're moving on to being a an island hopping force. For obvious reasons. But I so in terms of Zion, he's and he and I have some similar background. He's a geopolitically minded guy, meaning that like and he really has a geography based model, a geography and
and
demography.
and and, and demographics.
So
Yeah.
I think depending on who you're, everybody sort of has their uh, lens that they view geopolitics through. My previous boss was a hardcore geography guy. So, geography is destiny. He would certainly take the same point of view about Russia, that it has to push out its borders to accommodate for natural defensive elements. And that's where Zion gets it. But I think his belief is also that basically the demography of Russia might be teetering towards being essentially poisoned, where they have less of a carrying capacity of young people that can't support the needs of the older people. Also, they have their male female demographics are really astoundingly messed up. I think they have something like 60% women and like 40% men, just because they're like men just keep dying in wars that they
and
start.
alcohol.
Right. So that, but back to your question about like, what's the purpose of actually having these like nation states still if it's essentially just going to be, horse trading between these transnational oligarchs? And I think that it could very well be like that in the future. Who knows what the political units of the future will be. But I think that for right now, there are certain realities that need to be confronted by political leaders, and some of those realities are uh, needing to gather up a certain amount of assets and resources within your own sphere of influence, and ideally within your own borders. The USSR used to be the biggest country in the world, and they had a massively diversified basket of goods that they could produce and they could trade with. Russia as itself is a glorified petrostate that has the GDP of Texas. So part of the reason of pushing out borders is to also gain access to the resources in those borders. And that
Mm,
while gaining access to the resources within those borders, you're able to pull on certain strings that are incredibly important in a globalized world. There is a deal that had gone on for Ukrainian wheat. And so in the Red Sea, not, pardon me, in the Black Sea, a massively, fraught area right now where Russia has consistently parked its fleet off of the coast of Odessa there. They're still able to export grain. Why are they able to export grain? Well, because a lot of their grain goes to the Middle East. And when you don't have grain in the Middle East, you get bread riots and you get a lot more instability in the Middle East. Now, if they want to push out their borders, not only do they get more influence in the areas that diversify their economy, but they get levers to pull in other people's economies.
mm,
And they gain more political clout. Like right now, I just recently wrote a piece about Russia and China kind of jockeying for position in the Sahel, which is like the southern Sahara. So it's like
yeah.
Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Like why do you have a bunch of sunburned Russians in Burkina Faso right now? What are they doing there? And part of it is just the fact that if they can gather up a certain amount of political influence now, then it pays a premium later when either China wants to fill this negative space or the United States wants to come back in. They've denied the US the ability to generate resources and influence in that area. And sometimes that's worth it. It's, the same way that you're talking about personal or lifestyle arbitrage, countries do the exact same thing.
Mm,
And it's arbitrage around power projection. I so I was in, for my last book, I was in Somaliland, which is the northern portion of the Horn of Africa. And I started getting a bunch of text messages from friends in Somaliland, and they're like, "Hey, you should come to our national day." And I'm like, "Well, I haven't talked with you guys in like 5 years. What's up?" And they're like, "Yeah, you should just definitely come to the national day." And I was like, "This is weird that I'm like so many Somalilanders are like, get you got to come to Hargeisa." Um, and then I was sort of noodling around looking for more information about Somaliland, and it appears that the current administration might be in talks for recognizing Somaliland as an independent country, which is wild. And it's like, why would you do that? Dig a little deeper, and there's a lot of power arbitrage happening on the Horn of Africa right now. Turkey and Qatar are really trying to pour resources into federal Somalia in Mogadishu, so they can kind of help control the Gulf of Aden, which is where the Houthis are. Meanwhile, the UAE and potentially the United States right now might be throwing their lot in with Somaliland. So, we it's kind of like the opposite of you break it, you bought it, but like we create it, we bought it. Like we created a globalized world in the
Yeah.
Bretton Woods Accords that ended World War One. We dollarized the biggest economies in the world, and ensured that we had power projection over the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. And whether we like it or not, that is a wolf by the ears for the United States. And there's certain things that we really can't have at once. We cannot enjoy the benefits of a globalized world while also sneering at the detriments of a globalized world. We can't say, oh my gosh, I don't want foreigners coming to my country while also generating so much wealth in foreign countries and upsetting the apple carts politically in so many different foreign countries. You know, this is the price to pay that comes from being a global hegemon. And as it changes, uh, there's always violence and chaos as different world powers try to expand to the extents of their own abilities. How we enter this multipolar world, I don't know. I don't even know if the multipolar world is absolutely happening, where we sort of have three main power centers, or if it fractures into, something a little bit more unwieldy. Zion has his opinions, and I think he's got a great take on it, but yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to start a country, man.
I think that's a great place to end it. I don't know, Uh uh
Read my newsletter. You can hear me not know every 2 times a week.
well, it's extremely well informed, deeply considered lack of knowledge, I have to say.
That's the goal.
Yeah, yeah. When you start your country, I'd be happy to be the minister of relaxation.
Perfect.
We can maybe be a hammock exporter, depending
We'll
where
need one.
where
Yeah,
where we're located. I'm really big on hammocks and foot massages.
I love it. We're considering plopping down somewhere in the States, but we're gonna look at a couple of other locations. There are some places in the world, oddly enough, that are completely unclaimed by nation states.
Well, if you can do it in the States, come here. I mean, it's called Crestone. We could easily change it to Christown. Um, it's like a town of, a few hundred people. We've got a Zen Buddhist center, a Tibetan Buddhist center, an ashram, a ziggurat that was built by the father of Queen Noor of Jordan.
Weirdly, I know a decent amount about Crestone, because I have it in my will. I was climbing Mount Aconcagua in Argentina, and my mom said that I should probably have a will, and she's not wrong. Like it's a dangerous mountain, and but like I was being a little bit glib with my will as I wrote it, and I came to the section about like how I want to be buried, and I was like, I'm gonna put in something wild here so that I know my mom at least read my will. And I said that I wanted a funeral pyre burial. And the only two places in the United States that you can get a funeral pyre burial is there's one that's been opened up in New York State, but Crestone has been the only place that you can have a funeral pyre.
I've been to a bunch of them. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Oh
so
yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's true. There's a pyre out in the desert. And I had a guy on the podcast who was one of the first who sort of started the whole thing because he spent a lot of time in Tibet and India. And a friend of his was dying. And his friend said, "Hey, when I die, would you like bury or burn my body out in the desert here?" And he was like, "Yeah, okay." And then another guy was, reaching the end of his days and he had the same request. And eventually this guy, Paul, is like, "Yeah, I think I better like find a way to make this legal because I'm going to get in trouble for driving around with all these dead people in my pickup truck."
Yeah.
And
It's not a good look.
yeah, but in order for you to be cremated, you have to be a resident.
Ah, is that how it works? Okay, well, I'll be
So
visiting one way or another, either alive or dead. But
no, no,
sounds
you got to be a live resident,
shit. Okay,
and
good to
then you
know.
can die. So what you should do is come and visit, and we'll do another podcast in person, and you can use our address and register. And then
Perfect.
when you die, you can just have your body shipped here, and we'll dispose of it if I'm around, or someone will dispose of it.
Well, I'll look at some of the zoning because I know Crestone has a funny zoning thing too. Because it might be the type of federal land that we could start a nation state on, and that would be pretty fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds great. All right. Build your country locally, and I'll be there.
Perfect. Sounds
I,
great.
I dig it. All right, Eric, thank you. The under report, where do people
Under
find it?
report. I will send you a link. So if you could put like link in the bio or whatever, for subscribers, it's free right now. So if you want two bits of intelligence a week, one security briefing and one deep dive, then I'm your man.
And
Yeah.
what's your book called?
My book is called You Are Not Here: Travels Through Countries That Don't Exist.
Cool. And it's available in bookstores that don't exist?
In bookstores that don't exist, or Amazon.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you. Good